My name is Derick Ofodirinwa. I'm the host of the Medicine Show.
Hello and welcome to Obehi podcast. I'm your host, Obehi Ewanfo, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started into this episode.
Where I teach and research Igbo spirituality, popularly known as Odinani or Odinani Igbo, if you want to be fancy. I'm also the founder of Gedu.me, which is an Igbo language school that has a very unique approach to teaching language. So, all in all, I am a cultural advocate, maybe. I think that's the term. But yeah.
All right, that's interesting, Derek. Now we're going to be looking at Igbo language today. First, I want you to help us understand the origin of the language Igbo. Let's understand the origin of the language first.
No, that's a very, very interesting question, and I like how you started with the hardest possible question somebody can ask. So, the origin of the Igbo language is historically it's still a mystery, right? But in my own work, I have seen some things that point me in one direction or another. So, as far as the Kwa language family, which is a language family that pretty much encompasses Igbo land all the way to what I believe is modern day Ghana. Most of the languages in that area, especially towards the coast, are in the same language family. You're going to hear some of the same similar sounds. You're going to hear a lot of words that sound like each other, so on and so forth. Um, the age of that language family, I think it's very difficult to spot the age of a language family in general. But a lot of those languages start becoming distinguishable from each other. I believe due to the glottal, I can't say the word glottal, glottal chronological record around 6 to 7,000 years ago. Now that doesn't mean that this is when the languages first appeared, right? It doesn't mean that this is when the languages first appeared. It just means that at one point, these languages were so similar that it is hard to distinguish them from dialects of each other. And then around that time, they become so distinct from each other that you can now identify them as individual languages, right? So that tells you that the language itself or the language family is older than that 6,000 year point. And when you're looking at anything historically, once you pass these 6,000 year points, things become a little bit more blurry, especially with something as abstract as language. If it's something concrete like culture or cultural artifacts or human presence, you can trace that a little bit better. But what I do know is that Igbo seems to have a common origin with languages like Yoruba, Ewe, Isan, your own language, Bini, things like that. There's also a relationship with the Bantu languages, and we know that the Bantu migrations date back to, I want to say, close to 90,000 years ago. But there's a relationship there. There's a lot of overlap in words and sounds. What is interesting about Igbo is that between the Kwa language family, which spreads west, and the Bantu language family, which spreads east and south, it seems smack dab in the middle. And if you trace the archaeological records, the oldest artifacts, human artifacts in West Africa, are in an area of Igbo land known as Ugwuele, in what is now Abia State, right? That artifact record, or that the artifacts found there, date back to, I want to say, roughly that 9,000 year period where the Bantu migrations would have been happening or starting. And there's an intense density of what looks like hand axes, and spears. These hand axes and spears could be presumed to be farming instruments, right? So if the people who created those tools were speakers of the Igbo language, or a language we can identify as Igbo, right? Um, we're looking at a language that is one of the oldest in the world, right? And we're looking at a language family that is one of the oldest in the world, and one that is central to two major movements of human population throughout the world. There's also the mythological accounts, in the Igbo language of the coming of the language, and a lot of it points back to what is known as Afa or divination. Afa divination. It is said that the language that the divination beings speak, the Afa language, is the original language, and that what we speak is a casual or a colloquial derivative of what Afa is saying. So all of those are the different theories, or among the theories that are floating in the air.
Thank you very much for that. You see, now we are talking of language, we're already talking of history. And just now you were making mention of divination, we are already in spirituality. I remember what you said the last time, though, that in Africa it is difficult to take one thing and just explain that thing as if it were separate, no? Everything is connected.
Yes.
I like that. Those who listen to that episode and this episode, they can sort of find that easy. You see, recently I started to do some work in Esan culture, language, and history. What I found out, because what we know of ESA, in fact, what he did, what we have of the official record of ESA people, is that they came out of Benin. And they came out of Benin, of course, at the time of one of the Obas of Benin who had a very stringent rule at the time of money. It broke out a lot of law, so people ran away from Benin. But of course, we are talking of only less than 600, 700 years ago. So, but the point now is that in my research, what I found is that there are archaeological records of up to 3,000 years of history in Esan. Okay, now that become even challenging now to talk about. The person who did the study is in Moscow. I contacted him. I said, "Hey, come on, can we work on this again?" Well, he told me he cannot because right now he's not working on the project, so he's not ready to speak on that. But that is okay, fine. I'm only trying to point out thing here that from the surface, it appeared that we are just here for only a few hundreds of years. But if we go deep now, we can understand that we have been here for a very long time. A very long time. This language have been forming, migration, people have been moving. It becomes very interesting now. I don't know how you, first of all, look at the historicity of our language to start with. How do you look at that?
Isan is very interesting, and it falls under a lot of the patterns that you see when we tell history at home, right? And then the West suffers from this too. It's great man theory, right? But in our case, it becomes a little bit more of a problem. So, for example, typically people will say, "Oh, our people came from this place. Our people came from this place." When if you trace the story, it's always one specific person that came from that place. You understand? And then they say that once that person reaches, then our people come to that place. Well, who did he marry? Who did he interact with? All these different things. So what I think was that it was likely, and the reason I'm saying this is because in a lot of Igbo communities, we have the same thing that happens again and again. There was likely a famous man or a great man that came out of Benin and settled in Isan. And then from there, people then started saying later on down the line, this is the origin of the people. But like you said, if you trace the archaeological record, right, we take away he said, she said, you go to the archaeological record, the age would not make sense, or the age of human settlement in that area would not make sense with this account. So it's very interesting too, because when it comes to Benin, there are several stories of great men being kicked out for one reason or another, or having a fight with the Obehi and leaving. This is a consistent thing you see in that region, a very consistent storytelling in that region. And these stories take place about, like you said, about 600, between 600 years ago to roughly 200 to 300 at the most early, you know? And then again, you go back to those cultures and, of course, they're a lot older than this, right? So I think that there was a period in time, and it's interesting too, because I'm working on a documentary called the Ekumeku Uprising, on the Ekumeku Uprising. right? I'm taking my time with it because I want this to be studio quality. I want to put my all into it. And one of the things I saw, I think I'm revealing this to you first before anybody else. So you're getting the exclusive. But one of the things I saw
Thanks
that
for that.
no problem, man, no problem. But one of the things I saw is this is the exclusive. All over the world, not just in our area, that at the exact same time, it seems that the rich men and women started gaining more power than the people who have what I call ritual authority. So these are kings, queens, priests, so on and so forth. All of a sudden, the people who had more money started gaining more power than the people who you were just because of culture supposed to acknowledge as the leader. And what you hear in the exact same period, this is when all these stories where there was a great chief in Benin and the Oba was doing this and they didn't agree and then he left and he settled here and left and settled there, left and settled there. I think the person being referred to in your story is probably from Isan originally. He went to Benin, maybe for business, maybe he was a chief or something like that, and they had a dispute, right? Because in this era, a lot of the men who were rich started becoming more powerful than the Oba, or started threatening his authority. And the response was a consistent kicking them out or killing them. There's a very famous story of a man, it was written by a Portuguese explorer, I think his name's Pereira or something like that. I'm not good with names. He was in Benin and he wrote his accounts of what he saw and so on and so forth. And he recalled a story where the Oba became jealous because many of his chiefs had bigger houses than him. And the Oba demanded that everybody level their house if it was taller than his. And all the chiefs agreed except one, right? This one chief was banished by force and the house was burnt down. And then that chief returned with an army and sacked what is, and again, I'm just trying to remember the number, sacked what is close to 1/3 of the town before he was finally stopped, or 1/3 of the city before he was stopped, right? So this person came from somewhere because you don't leave and enter the bush where nobody's already settled and come back with an army. You know, people from all over the region and beyond came to Benin and settled. So I think the man you're referring to, or the man that they use to trace the origin of Isan and say that this is where you guys came from, he likely is like you and I, somebody who went abroad, right, and came back to his land. I don't think that he's the first in the culture, that kind of thing.
Thank you for that. I just want to show you something here in the map.
Okay, cool.
This is Benin City.
Yes.
You see that Benin is almost a kind of a landlocked, no?
Yeah.
Now, this is the land of Esan. This is Uromi. You see something here now? This is River Niger.
Yeah.
If you enlarge this map again, see that it actually tells you something here, no? All right, what I'm saying, what I want to just say there is that, of course, I'm not an archaeologist. I don't yet have any evidence to support that 3,000 years of history in Esan land compared to maybe what is in Benin, because at this time, there is nothing like the Empire of Benin yet, no? Because the Empire of Benin is something that came out much, much later now. So this requires a lot of work, you know, to really dig out the story. In fact, one of these, the opinion I was having is that probably this migration of people, of course, we didn't come out from the Atlantic Ocean. We came out probably through the river. And the river, you need to get to Esan before you can get to Benin. If you are maybe looking at it, like maybe you are going towards Lagos now or towards the south of Africa. So if we were to maybe go back to the ancient Silk Road, if we want to say where are we coming from, it begin to make sense now that the people from the Sahara Desert coming down towards the south, they probably, if they follow the river, because usually people, migration follow through the river, they most probably have settled in this land. But of course, again, it requires a lot of work to be able to dig it out. Who are these people? Where did they came from? Who did they mingle with? What did they do and all that? But I'm just like putting it out there because what you say make a lot of sense and it is very important, very interesting, which is the language that we are talking about today. How do language actually evolve? Because now people move, no? What we understand from Africa is a complex society, Also a piece of land. This is where humanity was born. So for several thousands of years, human being was living only in Africa. Names have changed, cities have changed, lands have changed. Even places that we used to live, like the Sahara Desert, it was once a place that people used to live. People don't live there anymore. So what has happened in all those places? Of course, it means that there is a lot of work that we need to do as Africa to even tell our story. Our story did not begin in slavery. It did not begin with colonialism. We have been living, we have been making city be existing before we have this experience. If we were to just take a timetable and rule and say the story of slavery and transatlantic slave trade and colonialism, it will be a dot in African history.
Yes,
It's too insignificant if you were to just measure it. So we have a lot of history that we must tell, but we are going to be ready to tell the story. So the question is, how do languages develop and then multiply and then die and then reform? Help me understand the development of languages.
Absolutely. So when I started my language school, kedu.me, one of the things, like, I never want to step into a space and not understand what the history of it is and not understand the dynamics of it. And I knew that based on the difficulty we've been having so far as a culture, teaching the language, as far as Igbo people, teaching our language, that we have to try a different approach. There has to be a better way or a more modern way to do this thing. So I really took a deep dive into language as a whole, just on trying to understand what language is, how it works, so on and so forth. The fact that he presents a lot of interesting new ideas. I'm a fan of Noam Chomsky's theories as far as language goes, and so on and so forth. And one of the things he says is that, or one of the things he points out, is that if you were to look at a frog, right? You as a person would look at a frog and they were making their frog noises, they would be indistinguishable from each other because the level of separation between you and the frog causes that perception. But that to the frog, they are so attuned to hearing the nuances in their sounds, right? Though we don't identify their sounds as language, the nuances in their sounds, that it sounds radically different. And in fact, everything outside of frog might sound the same, right? That kind of thing. And so why do I say this? Language, according to him, evolves almost like a wave, right? Where maybe there is a point of population and they find a way to express ideas to each other. And the next group over is going to sound like them and sound like them and sound like them. And then when there's a natural barrier, a river, a mountain, even something as small as a hill, suddenly you get a little bit more variation. Not because of anything outside of the fact that we're not talking to each other as often anymore. One of the things I learned in developing Get.me is that language is not developed or is not taught from parent to child or teacher to child in like a lateral hierarchy. It is taught or not lateral, but up and down hierarchy, but it is taught laterally, peer to peer, friend to friend, merchant to merchant, that kind of thing. That's how it transfers. So when we're not having that peer-to-peer interaction, there'll be tiny variations, right? Now, somebody from the other side of the world will come over and listen, and he won't hear the difference between you who is on this side of the hill and that one on this side of the hill. It's all going to sound like the same sound collection or language to him, right? And it keeps going and going and going. When there's a natural barrier, a change happens, and the further you go, so that if you go to a map of like Europe, and you're just going from town to town, it's very hard to tell where French becomes German, right? Until you zoom out and look at it from a bird's eye. Then I go, okay, obviously it's somewhere in this area. But if you go in that area, they're going to speak something similar to both of those languages. So one of the theories he has is that not necessarily that we're all speaking the same language, but language is this interwoven tapestry, this connected tapestry that only changes based on polarity and distance, right? It's not something that somebody sits down and develops consciously as a whole. know. So that's an interesting take on it. Now, I am not a linguist, so I'm sure there are contrary views on it and so on and so forth. But what he said made a lot of sense because, again, speaking about history, I have this account in my library. One of the things I do for all my patrons, it's patreon.com/the medicine show. But one of the things I do for all my patrons, I make my research library available. So all these documents I refer to, they're all in there. But there's the accounts of Bishop Ajayi Crowder. I think that's his name. Ajayi Crowder. He's the one who is famous for creating the primer of the Yoruba language for their Bible and the Igbo language for our Bible. And so one of the things he did was he was trying to figure out because he knew there was a lot of dialects in the Igbo language, and he was trying to figure out what the real Igbo was in his mind, because he knew that was somebody speaking it. He felt somebody speaking it correctly, and everybody else is speaking a variation of that correct central version. And he identified the Isu group, right, as the central Igbo for many reasons, right? A lot of different Igbo communities say, I come from here, we come from here, but Isu people will say that they came out of the ground, which typically means we've been here so long that there's no point trying to even discuss where we came from, right? They're also right in the middle of the map, and it's the densest part of population-wise. So if there's going to be an origin, it would likely be from that area. And so he said this has to be the central Igbo group. And he also saw that the Isu people could be understood by a lot of the other Igbos, but some of the other Igbos can't understand each other. Again, like that tapestry. If there's a wave, and I'm on the far east of that wave, and you're on the far west, we're gonna have a hard time understanding each other. But we can both understand the person in the middle very well, or better than each other. Right. And so based on all those context clues, he said this is the central group. Well, then he went to Onitsha, and he had wrote a Bible verse in the Isu language, and he spoke it to them, and they started laughing at him, right? That this isn't our language, that this is Igbo, we speak Onitsha, right? And he'd go to another village, and they say, no, that's Onitsha, we speak this. And so they saw their communities as entirely different languages. And it was him, a foreigner, somebody from far away, who has a bird's eye view that can say, you're all speaking the same language. You understand? Back to that frog example, right? To me, a frog, you're all making the same sound. But to each other, they're going to hear these little nuances and things like that. So language, as far as the origin of language, is very interesting, but you see it in the way we interpret ourselves, right? Interpret languages. I always say that if Europe was placed in Africa, they would identify all of the Romance languages as the same, different dialects of the same language, right? I think it's politics and history that gives them the right to say they're different languages. But somebody says "Ola," somebody says "Alo." You know, it's a lot closer than somebody saying "Kilo de," somebody saying "Dewo," that kind of thing. So go ahead.
That's powerful. I interviewed a man yesterday from Congo. Of course, he did make reference to Igbo too, but in this case, what we were discussing was African traditional religion. And his thesis is that all African traditional religion are one. They can actually be unified as one. So that is what he is actually working on, how to unify African traditional belief system, which of course, contrary to how the West understand Christianity, this guy is actually powerful. Really very interesting conversation. I think we spent like 2 hours in the conversation, and it's really deep, no? Looking at what is God, the concept of God and everything about it, going back to ancient Kemet, and it's really an interesting conversation.
That was a good one, yeah.
Now, of course, we didn't finish, so we're going to go back again. We already booked another appointment. Now, the point, what I'm trying to say here is that when we stay at the ordinary level, we just believe that we know everything. We don't know everything yet. We need to keep on digging up the story. You did say something like at a point people say they came out from the ground, no? You know that among the Yoruba people, they believe that Oduduwa came from the sky, no? Okay, now if you go to the Benin, some of the founders of the Benin people, they refer to the king as Ojiso. Now, what is Ojiso?
Yeah.
Ojiso means king of the sky. Okay, so the question now is that is it really because there is a difference between knowledge and folklore. Some of the things that we don't really they don't really make sense as it were, but we just believe them. But not all of us are going to believe them because we are going to. Okay, now what the guy was saying yesterday, what the professor was saying yesterday is that African traditional belief system is a pure science.
Yes.
Compared to Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So we must understand this as a science.
Yes.
So there are things that we might say, okay, yeah, this is people came from the ground, but there are times that we are going to have to really evaluate them. We need to evaluate some of these things and really say, okay, this exactly is what this means. And we can prove it, we can show it. I think this is the work of the African people. We need to dig out our history, like I always say here, all the time. Nobody is coming to do this work for us. It is us that will do it. Now, who was speaking Igbo language, say, because you did mention the fact that this language had probably been existing for about 6,000 years or so, thereabout. More than that, okay? How do we know who were speaking these languages? Were they within the territory of Igbo extraction in Nigeria, today, present-day Nigeria? Or were they also speaking this language in some other part, and then they came, and were there interaction? How do we find some evidence of this language in its continuous evolution?
For sure. Yeah, again, that is difficult. That is difficult, especially without our contemporary form of writing. Our ancestors did have forms of writing, but they were almost independent of spoken language, right? They're almost completely independent. So that, for example, if we use like Insipidi or Uli, which I'm coming to see are more or less the same, right? Uli refers to the die, and Insipidi refers to a specific code system within the writing system. If we look at those written language systems, people across different cultures wrote with them, right? It said that Insipidi itself doesn't originally come from the Igbo culture, but an Efik person, an Igbo person, an Ibibio person. And funny enough, people in Congo, I'm coming to learn, will all write in the same way and communicate with each other using that thing. So we don't have, as far as history goes, we don't have the advantage of written language in the way we see it in the West, right? It's hard to say what, and that being said, it's very difficult to say who was speaking what language where, right? It is very difficult to say that. But our region, I mean, the lower Niger region, has an unusually, for any place in the world, high population density. It's very old. There's a lot of people concentrated in that very relatively small space. It's very dense. I think that even if you look at the transatlantic slave trade, that region was used to populate a couple of continents and islands, right? And the way the population is going back again, it's going to be one of those places where you look at the Indus Valley, China in general, that kind of, it's going to be like that type of place where it's like one of those major world population centers. I think it has always been that. It has always been, Nile Valley is another one. It has always been a major population center. So when we talk about language, I think there's too many people speaking that language in one place without any evidence of them being forced to speak it for us to speak about, how do I put it? Like for us to assume something else was being spoken, for us to assume something else is being spoken in this place. I think, of course, the nature of words change. And I think that there was a language that nearly, not all of them, but nearly every language in that region was speaking that was mutually intelligible until fairly recent history, right? I think there was a common language that we were speaking, and I have a lot of evidence to that, right? One of the smaller examples I can give is, for example, now, how do you say woman in your language?
Oho.
Oho. Okay, that's different.
Mm.
In Yoruba, it's iya, right? Or something similar like that. Iya, right? And
Mm.
so Igbo people, we say, oh, ours is wine. It's different. Iya, wine. It's different. But that iya, that IYA is still lingering around in some Igbo words, right? With a slightly different shape. So a congress of wives is Binyan, Inyan, Iya, Inyan, right? Even the word wine, Iya is there, wine.
Before you conclude that, Iye. Iye in our place, meaning, okay, that is coming from Benin now, meaning mother. Okay, you can get it. It's turning all around
In
again.
the Akwa Ibom region, it's Iyom, something like that, Iyom with an M, right? And so when you see these things, and the word mother tells you a lot about languages, right? Because you're in Europe now. You, I don't, just about anywhere you go in Europe, there may be exceptions like Hungary and Finland just because their language group is different. The word for mother is going to be roughly mutually intelligible. This one's going to say mama, this one's going to say Mia, this one's going to say mom, this one's going to say mom. That word is so core to the human being, right? That it's one of the words that when you're tracing language, it changes very little geographically. As you that spreading, you're going to really see it with words like mother, right? Another one is, as far as Europe goes, it's father, right? It's father, potter, all these different things are all going to produce different sounds that in the end are not that different.
How do you say father in your place?
Father, Ina, Ina.
Father in our place, we say Abba.
Abba.
Mm.
Now that's interesting because you say Abba. I want to say in Igala, they say Ata for the head male or the apex man of a community is the Ata, right? So you see these things. You understand? Well, your friend from Congo, I would love to watch that interview. What your friend from Congo was referring to as far as this commonality, he's very much on the mark. And anybody who's looked into it as deeply as I have walks out saying the same thing. And he's saying, look, this is what I'm saying. Let's just make it official, right? And I agree with him. I agree with him.
It's very interesting. Please go.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with them because again, when you look at these things, the lines start blurring. Those lines become more and more superficial. Again, like the frog example, right? Like the frog example. To us, they're all saying the same thing. To each other, they know this one means I'm trying to mate. This one means I'm trying to do this. This one means I'm hungry. This one means there's danger, that kind of thing. But to me, it just sounds like rivet. You understand? And then if aliens came and listened to us, we'd probably be making the exact same noises in their ear, right? But to us, we're speaking all these diverse languages. Well, in Africa's case, right, because we're all close to each other, it shrinks even more, right? My biggest tool, my number one tool in my research is language. The Igbo language has taught me more than any researcher or anything because it's all right there. It's all right there.
It's powerful.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's powerful. Language is powerful.
Yeah.
And I think we should really be very serious about conserving this language, not only for us, but also for generation yet unborn. Because it's a window. It's a window to understand the people. It's very important. Now, tell me, yeah, please go.
Yeah, there's the same person, Noam Chomsky. One of the theories he has too that I also agree with is this idea that language is not a tool for communication, which sounds strange, right? It's not a tool for communication, it's a tool for thinking, right? It's a tool for thinking. That's how he put it. This is his own theory, right? And he's foremost, blah, 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 right? It's a tool for thinking. And so what I've come to see is that our languages, if you really want to understand how our ancestors think or how we as a people think, once you learn the language, it comes out. You're like, oh, okay, that's what it is. Very interesting.
Okay, before you continue there, I interviewed a lecturer in US. He told me that He wanted to, it's a historian, it's a linguistic, in fact. He wanted to understand how the Greek philosophers think. He didn't buy the book and read. He went and first of all understand the language of ancient Greek.
Yes.
He said from there he read their text. From there he can decode how they think. So it's not just a method of communication, but it's also a method of reflection. I agree with you 100%. Please go.
Yeah, no, it really reveals a lot about the thinking. Like with Kedu, I'm not the teacher. I'm not equipped to be a teacher for Kedu. I'm still learning, in fact, as far as Igbo goes. But of course, sometimes I'll listen in on our classes and things like that. And one of the things that students will say is because a lot of them are coming from maybe they watch videos from the Medicine Shell, or they're a patron and they're saying that, okay, this is really interesting. I want to, let me see if I can learn the language. And one of the things they always say is that once you learn the Igbo language, a lot of the spiritual concepts I'm talking about just kind of start connecting. It's like, oh yeah, that does make sense, right? Like for example, we have the term for God, Chineke, right? And I have an entire video explaining what the last part, Eke, it's Chineke. But if you know the Igbo language, it's saying chi and eke, chi, not eke. So it's two, it's like a mother and a father, right? Two things. And the word eke literally means creation, right? So I can make that kind of thing. So, or eke keruwa, right? And so if I can make a 50-minute video explaining what eke is, but if you spoke the language, it already clicks automatically. You understand? So all these different concepts just kind of click automatically, right? Click automatically. And once you know the language, Amadioha, right? People say, oh, Amadioha, he's the god of thunder, da, 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 da. But then what does Amadioha? And Amadi is a lord or a free man. Oha means the people. So Amadioha literally means free man of the people, or the will of the people, the representative of the people. Like when you send a congressman to represent you, that's Amadioha. And all of a sudden the concept just opens up like, oh, whoa, they're not talking about thunder. Now they're talking about Martin Luther King. Now they're talking about, let's say, Gandhi. They're talking about Napoleon. They're talking about, then when you hear things like Amadioha is the god of war, yeah, of course, because we send our men to go, our Amadioha to go and do that thing for us, and it becomes less mystical. You gotta realize this is a science. They're not talking about what you think they're talking about without knowing the language. Once you know the language, it just opens itself up. There's a really great video on YouTube. I'm trying to find it still. They're asking this very old woman, what does Amadioha mean? She's like, this is Amadioha. Oh, this is Amadioha. If you were Amadioha, you would be like that kind of, But if you ask somebody who doesn't speak the language, say, oh, he's the god of thunder. Thunder, which is also one of his attributes, right? But the language gives it a whole different gravity.
It's true. It's true. Very, very important. All right. Another thing I'm sort of curious about too is a script. You see, I think as Africa we have been over miseducated for too long that we don't even believe that anything we have has any value. Like you thought of the CBD, for example. Talking of African script and languages, Igbo in this case, what can you say about that?
Yeah, thank you for that. So what's interesting about the Igbo language is that there are actually several scripts, but these scripts all have very specific function. And most of the time, they are typically codes of secret communication, right? Most of the time, not all the time, but most. The most accessible and common is what we are now calling Uli, right? Uli. Now, Uli is interesting because it was said that in the past, it was specifically women who wrote in this Uli language. And one of the most common uses of Uli is in decorating yourself, like makeup, all kind of thing. But when you look at it, there'll be specific like shapes, and these shapes will be consistent and so forth, right? Like in Uli, the word for eke, that same eke I was talking about, is spiral, right? And then the word for akaraka, which is The word for akaka is like very, very, very literally etchings on your palm, but it is like like it's how your future is understood, it's greater unseen, past, present, future, right? Your akaraka, destiny, your origins, all that stuff, like your script. It's also the same spiral. Now, if you understand the cosmology, you'll know why they're the same symbol. That type of. So Uli is that's an example of some nodes, some symbols in Uli. But Uli is very interesting because it seems to me that whatever Uli is, Insibidi and the rest of them are built on top of that. And Uli is very accessible, specifically to women, whereas the rest are used by men. And then once it's held by men, it now becomes a secret language. And this is just a pattern that I saw that I found was really interesting. But that being said, it was very rare that our ancestors, I'm speaking about Igbo specifically, used writing to record history. And it's interesting because you would think if they have it, the next instinct would be to use it to record history, especially in a place where ancestors are so important, right? So that's interesting. That's something that's worth looking at because the option was there, but it wasn't taken, right? And now with these languages floating around, again, we talk about like Benin, for example. Benin was a very cosmopolitan place. It had people from all over the place. It had people who wrote in Arabic. There were people who wrote in Portuguese, all these different languages. But again, writing is not used to record history again, which is interesting. But what you do see are the bronzes, right? The very famous bronzes that have the different scenes of life and cosmic imagination of the Benin people just over time, so on and so forth, the Benin bronzes and so forth. In Igbo land, a lot of history gets recorded through many methods, one of which is ritual, another which is masquerade, so on and so forth. But for some reason, our ancestors didn't use writing to write down history. The closest account that I have seen was the recording of a court case, the writing down of a court case in Igbo land. But what was interesting about that court case was that it was written in the sand originally, and it was a European that transcribed it onto paper because he wanted to take the earth and show them this is what they're talking
about. So when was that case?
This had to have been in the early 1900s. The early 1900s. It was interesting because Insibidi is interesting because it'll look like one picture, and it's not read back and forth or up and down. It's read as a whole, right? Just like the way you look at a picture of Picasso, like if somebody painted a picture of Obehi, right? I would just look at it and say, okay, that's him. I wouldn't look, scan it. Okay, that kind of. So you look at it as a whole, and it's interesting. I have a video on my channel called Insibidi Explain, where I write down the court case. I retranscribe it, and I show the audience, this is what the writing looked like and how they did their court cases. So that was one of the only times I saw like a specific recording of history using writing. So again, I would be very interested in knowing why that decision was made because the option was there. But yeah, the theory-wise, it's up to anybody. But yeah, Africa was very rich with scripts. From East to West Africa, you'll find different examples and types and methods of scripts. Central Africa, you'll find something similar, or in fact, with Central Africa, you find something that today resembles a microchip, right? But that microchip is used it's a human interpreter rather than a machine. And you look at it as a board. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's in Congo, and I think your friend would probably be able to tell us exactly what I'm talking about. But it's a board, and it has all these circular shapes, so on and so forth. And a person would be able to tell you everything that is being said just by reading the shapes. And so that kind of thing, right? That kind of thing, or whatever. And it looks like it. The look reminds me very much of a microchip. I just cannot remember the name, which is funny because we discussed that on the Patreon a few I think last year. And so forth. So all of these different methods for writing and recording were there. The way they were applied and their uses differ from how we use writing now. I'm not saying one's better than the other. They differ from the way we do writing now, but the scripts are there, and anybody who has enough, who's genuine in their pursuits of this idea can look and they'll find different examples of African scripts and so forth.
Thank you for that. It's very important. Again, this is our story. We are the one that we bring it out because we are the one that it represents. You take out a script in Igbo land, the people that script is going to glorify, of course, in the Igbo people, if you are talking of maybe try to look for evidence of your existence now. So we don't expect other people to come and do the digging because it doesn't really concern them. So in this sense, African people, it is our duty, our job to dig out our history, interpret it and reinterpret it and reinterpret it again as many times as necessary. It is very important. Very, very important. Because now, talking of the uniformity of Africa, like the guest yesterday was saying, if you begin to look at how we organize our society, then we see that there is a lot of coronation very similar all around now. And yet, we are very far away. When I did a documentary in 2015, then at the ending of the documentary that I titled Pan-Africanism, Testing Idea on Reality, of course, it's true that I was looking at the what is our responsibility in what is happening in Africa. If we have this beautiful idea of Pan-Africanism, for example, why are we not practicing it? Why are we not implementing it? Then at the point I wanted to conclude it, I just pick a picture of Ramses II, and a graphic of him. Then I pick a picture in Benin. These are two places that are too far away, but they have this very sign. If you look at artifacts in Benin, you will see it. That is how it looked. That is how Ramses also looked. Now the question is, the message I wanted to pass to the people, of course, I didn't write it, I didn't say it anywhere, is that look at it, we are all one, Africans. We are one. It is for us to find out where Egypt is and where Benin is very far. But look at the symbol, look at the symbology there. We are one. It's just for us to find out.
Let me add something very interesting, right? This is just speculation, but it's speculation based on facts. If you see a mask in the Igbo culture that has an X on its head, right, or folded hands, but you're not gonna, it's not all common. You'll find it folded. It's typically an X, right? This means it's like a parcel that goes to God, right? So when God sends you a message, a messenger of God, if the mask is depicting somebody who received what was known as Abia, which is wisdom from beyond, right? There will be an X on the head, right? And that X shape is typically used for like communicating, right? So the word, like in this, use the X to say communicate, that kind of thing. But that X they're making with their hands typically says that this person receives messages from God. And
how powerful is that?
It's very powerful, right? And then you now see these burial sites and so forth, where the person will now make an X with their hand, specifically if they are in the role of being the Oumon, the mouth of the spirits, which were the Pharaoh, the Oba, the POB. All of these are traditional leaders, right? All have this very similar role. So I was thinking about that. It was funny that it was actually Black Panther that made me think about that X sign, right? And I was like, this is a pretty universal thing you see throughout Africa. It's this X sign and so forth. And it's funny that in Nsibidi, that X is like communicating or messaging, right? Communication, messaging, that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if there's a parallel. So that's my own theory, anyways, or where my eyes are at. But yeah, you see these things. And one of the things that we have to understand too, because while Africa is very similar, Africa is radically different, right? The differences are radical, the similarities are radical. It's hard to explain unless you understand this. I think we as Africans are a scientific people, and we somehow stopped defining ourselves this way, right? And what do I mean by that? We develop our cultures based off of observed reality. It's not somebody sitting at the top saying, from now on, we're all going to do this. No. I did this and it worked. Okay, let's keep doing that. Right? I observe this and this means that. Okay, if it means that, prove it. Okay, I'll prove it. The person proves it. Okay, then where I'm from, an Arishi, right? Like a place you'll go, like a shrine. You understand? If the people that control that Arishi claim that it cures this, and that, and you go there and it doesn't cure those things, you don't go there anymore. People stop going. There's no obligation to continue going. It's not like every Sunday we have to be at the whatever, or Friday we have to be at the mosque, that kind of thing. It's the thing that's proven to work, so then keep going there. So if you have that basic kind of method of thinking, everywhere you go, you're going to recreate something very similar because we're all sharing the same world. And if my theory is to form my culture based off of what I'm observing, what's going on in the land, right? We're going to see very similar things. Like I always say that no matter, I think wherever you take Africans, they'll recreate Africa, right? Everywhere you take Africans, they'll recreate Africa. I live here in the United States, and there's this myth that people say that Black Americans here in America don't have African culture. It is an absolute. It's not true. It's not true, right? But they created an African culture based off the land that they're in and the circumstance that they're in. And if you look at a lot of the things that they, like when I talk about my videos, this is where I get the most, oh my God, my grandmother does that. We call that this. Oh, my grandfather does that. We call that this. Oh, we do that every Wednesday. Oh, this and this and that. That's where I get the most of that feedback. But somehow it's where the least amount of Africa is preserved. And that's just not true. Odinani, right? The term Odinani or Odinala it literally means as it is on the land, right? So Odinala, this Igbo spirituality, we're calling it, right? Observe what's going on the land, act accordingly. And that's what you see throughout Africa. You see that throughout Africa. And that's why I think you get so many similarities. I think we talked about this last time where if you are standing in Mozambique and you're standing in Gambia and you're both describing the sky, you're going to say very similar things, right? You're going to say very similar things. And I think that's where a lot of those commonalities come from. I could be wrong, but I could be wrong. Go ahead.
If you look at the language of Igbo people of Nigeria, the Igbo language, is there anything you can say maybe that's separated from other languages around?
Oh, good question. I would have to learn more of the other languages. And then, of course, my depth in Igbo is not the strongest, right? I lived at home for about 3-4 years, and I came back when I was 7. So typically, I don't know what a 7-year-old doesn't know when it comes to Igbo language, right? If you start talking about anything too X-rated, I don't know what you're talking about, right? So I have limits as far as Igbo goes, but it's a lifelong journey of learning and getting better at that type of thing. So, but that being said, may not be the best person to ask that question because I don't know too much about the other languages around. But one of the things I will say about Igbo that is very unique is it has a very mathematical nature, right? It's like learning Igbo it's very similar to the way you would learn how to do multiplication, addition, subtraction, and so forth. Why do I say this? Because in really looking at it, I saw that all of the words were either onomatopoeia, which is a sound turned into a word, right? Or like, for example, camp, that kind of thing, simple. So it's either that, and that's the more rare situation, or it is a conjugation of a verb, right? So that if you learn 20 verbs in the Igbo language, you will learn an infinite amount of words, right? An infinite amount of words, which is very similar to mathematics, where if you learn 0 to 9, those digits 0 to 9, you now can create an infinite amount of numbers, right? So I'll try to think of an example. Okay, for example, Udinala, right? You go to the first sound, the Udi, right? Udi, right? Udi is that di is like a state, like a how something is, a state of being, right? A state of being. If you put an O in front of it, or D, it's almost like um, uh, situation or status, or not status like rank, but like what is the status of uh, the weather in California, that kind of thing. Right? That kind of thing. But that ODI describes that. If you replace the O with a U, it becomes UD, right? UD is like an era, like an era. What is the state of being in time, right? UD, state of being in time. And you can just take any word and you can just do that. Like you take the verb, di, or whatever verb it is, ga, ga. Uga is also like an era, an epoch, right? The different ages of time. We talk about the Renaissance there. All those are uga and uga, right? And then ga itself is like movement. Ga, to go, is go, ga, movement, that kind of thing. So you take those verbs and you put something in front of it, it becomes something new that is related to that verb. It changes the nature of that verb, but it puts the verb in a new context, right? One of the most loud and clear examples is like agon, right? Agon. People, there's this argument among Igbo people whether agon means lion or leopard. It means leopard. Stop that lion. So it means leopard. So, but if you say agon just casually, you could be saying leopard, right? If you say agon is wind. Now I'm talking about the leopard of the sky. This is a hawk or a falcon. If I say agni, now I'm talking about the agon of the river, which is a crocodile, right? So then what is that word agon? You see how it's used like mathematics. So I take 9 and I put a 0 behind it, it's 90. If I put 2 zeros, it's 900, that kind of thing. Now, what is that agon? All of what it's hard to define, but it's whatever all of them have in common. And what I saw that they all have in common is that one, they're the apex predator in all of those terrains, right? And then two, they have the ability to function on all forms. Like, so Agon Walk can fight you on land, they can fight you in the water, it can fight you in the air. Agon the leopard can fight you in the air, it can fight you on the ground, it can fight you in the water. A crocodile can fight you in land, air, water. If you see a crocodile climb a tree, it will blow your mind, but they are excellent climbers, right? That kind of thing. And they can leap and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So that's one thing I thought they all had in common. It's a very mathematical language. And when you understand that, you just figure out what the digits are. Digits are the verbs. Once you figure out the verbs, you can then now start playing with the words and creating different words. I think that's a lot of fun. So
I have another curiosity, which is the sound itself. Of course, you already explained this part of it now when you were doing the initial lay down of the argument of language. That basically, as people move, maybe for example, there is a rivalry between the language is going to change based on that limitation. That is a big mountain. Maybe some people are living because it's a living thing. If you are not exchanging it all the time, then you lose it to the people you are not exchanging it with. Whether the people you are exchanging it with, you continue to have a similar intonation there. Now, I'm trying to imagine something in our language now. Say, maybe, for example, say my brother will call me. Say my mom call my name like this, Obehi. Or maybe somebody call Obehi.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
They are not meaning the same thing.
Yeah.
They are not saying the same thing.
At all. Yeah.
This one, the person that hears it, if you are not part of the culture, you don't understand what it means. So I want you to tell me a little bit about that, because if my mom called me Obehi, meaning that she's suspecting, that is what that would mean. But she can still call me Obehi. She's not suspecting, No. Obehi.
Yeah.
If she stresses like that, though, that is a warning.
This is a unique feature in our languages, and it's so funny that you're saying it's called. Okay, so for Kedu, my Igbo language school, we have it broken down different levels, right? So level 1, you're introducing yourself to the language, you're getting comfortable using it, that kind of thing. Level 2, you're working on sounding more native, like a native speaker. You're working on being more nuanced and smooth in your delivery and that kind of thing. And one of the things I've found that I've had to make sure that people learn, especially at level 2, is that the way you say things completely affects the meaning. And that our languages, and I say our languages because the same language family, so I'm assuming the rules are similar. Our languages they're not said, they're sung, right? I think we get into this Western mode of, oh, it's a tonal language, so this is the uptone, this is the downtone, which is fine. If that's how you want to learn it, that's fine. But if you think about it like a song, rather than what, the foreigners use to do language, it'll make a lot more, it'll start clicking a lot faster. Now, how do I say this? Or how do I make this? If I say Obehi, right? And then somebody has to now say what I just said. If they say Obehi, they've said something different. You actually have to sing it in the rhythm that I said it, right? So there's a song that goes, this is Thriller, na na na. You can't just say this is Thriller, na na na. We're not doing the same thing. You have to sing this is Thriller, na. You have to do that. So okay, now we're saying the same thing. And so if you think about our languages, the one thing it cracks the code for a lot of people. I've come to see. It's like with our teachers in Kedu, they don't say repeat after me. They say sing it the way I'm singing. Sing it because
that's interesting.
Yeah, the number one relationship English speaking people have with tone is in music. They know that the way you say the word is important in song. So now is the same thing in Igbo. Now, what do you hear often when a lot of foreigners hear our language? Oh, it sounds like music. Oh, it sounds like that person's singing. So if you step outside, way, way, way outside, you can hear that musicality. But we who speak it every day, it's so natural that we don't even think about it. We don't even think about it. And so, yeah, that's what we focus on in Igbo too, is learning that song, learning to sing the language. And like you said, with Igbo language, right, if you say, the way you say something, your emotion in saying something changes the meaning. And that emotion is important, right? So, and one of the things we always emphasize too at the Igbo 2 level is that when you speak the language, use your body. Use your voice. You open your mouth. You don't when you speak English. You use everything. You open your mouth. You feel free. You understand? Because all of that is going to let you act out the word. So you know the meaning. You know your name changes meaning based on your mother's emotion because she's going to put the emotion in the language. You understand? So no, it's interesting you pointed that out because that was actually one of the things that as of this week is being focused on. Good.
Thank you for that. All right. Now, somebody that want to learn Igbo language, what do you recommend that the person should start from?
Yes. So my natural instinct as an Igbo man would be to come to my language school, right? But if somebody
Talk more about that language school, how people can connect you, how people can get there, what they can benefit. Sure. Tell more about it. Yeah, it's your time. Advertise it.
Yeah, the first thing I want to do is for those who maybe can't afford to give them options, and then I'll talk more about the language. So if you cannot afford, or like maybe it's just not convenient for you at the time, and you want to start learning the language, the best thing to do is find somebody who speaks the language, who's willing to just have conversation, and preferably somebody roughly your age, and preferably somebody of the same gender. All of these things are important, and it helps you transfer language faster. Listening to audios is also good. Listening to people like audio, especially if you have the written like transcript, that's also a very good tool. And then lastly, like I learned the language, of course, when I was at home. I lost it when I was in America, so I'm in the process of regaining it, relearning it. And one of the things that helped me is that I'm very passionate about like hip hop. I love music, right, and the culture and everything. So I would translate some of my favorite songs in Igbo in my head. And it was extremely difficult, but once they'd figured out, it was fun. It was like a game. And that helped me learn a lot of new words, right? So those are things that you can try. Now, as far as Kedu.me, so if you go to www.kedu.me, you can sign up with Kedu. At the very bottom of the front page, there is a survey. And that survey is going to let us know what level you're at in case you're not sure what level to sign up at. Now with Kedu, we have Asusu Igbo 1. Igbo 1 is you just don't speak the language, period, right? can't hear it, you can't say it, nothing. Just don't have it. So that's Igbo 1. It's designed for somebody at that level. Igbo 2 is maybe you can hear, but you can't speak. Or maybe you can speak, but don't like the way you sound, or your accent is rough, or maybe you don't feel confident in speaking, that kind of thing. Just like you have elements of the language, but there's the fundamentals are missing. That's Igbo 1. And then somebody who wants to reach like an academic proficiency, right? So I'd say I can speak English at academic proficiency. Somebody else do that. That's Igbo level 3. But if you don't know what level you're at, there's a survey, and then there we recommend, right? So the way Kedu works, that makes it work, that makes it effective, because we have people who, no exaggeration, have never heard the language before, maybe say the medicine shell, or maybe they've dabbled with things here and there, like Things Fall Apart. They heard terms and music, right? Afrobeats is big now, that kind of thing. They've heard terms here, but don't know the language. And they're speaking. Right now, they're speaking after 3 months. Well, some of the people I'm referring to are on 4 because they signed up for a second session, right? But they're speaking now. They can speak the language in 3 months. And the reason they're able to do that is because, again, the method I developed is very specific. What is the specifics of it? Right? I'm going to give it to you because I want people to copy. I want everybody to do this, right? The specifics of the method is you are paired with an instructor. Your instructor is going to give you pieces of the language. You're going to just isolate and dissect. Because remember, again, it's a mathematical language. So if I learned the word me, M-E, right, is do, right? Me, that word, M-E, is do. And then from there, if I throw different letters in front of it, they become different words. Different. I can use them in all these different ways. Omume is your movement, that kind of thing. Just different examples like that. And me is like your present state action. So dissecting it piece by piece by piece. And then you have a coach. Your coach is somebody who you and them determine, okay, we're going to talk 2 times a week. We're going to talk 1 time a week. We're going to talk every single day that we can talk. And your coach calls you, or you call your coach, and then you guys just have a normal conversation. Nothing academic. Oh, wow, work is stressing me out today. Okay, I'm tired of being single. I'm about to do this Tinder app. You just have a normal conversation, right? And the pairing of those 2 things creates a situation where you learn the language very fast, right? So all that is at www.kedu.com. This is a method that I've developed with about 2 years of research into language itself. And then, of course, pairing the students with just phenomenal teachers. Right now, our coach is Uju. Uju is there's not a topic in the world that Uju can't comfortably sit down and talk to you with, and so forth. When people sign up for Kedu, it's funny because they always go, okay, maybe I'll do coaching once a week, and they talk to her twice, and all of a sudden they want to do it 5 days. You understand? And then, of course, our instructor, Chimezie, who is a folklorist, so he has a very rich and intimate understanding of the language on a cosmological level, on a historical level, all these different things. Just brilliant. So I make sure that that's the quality of teacher and coach that I pair people with, and so forth. So, yeah.
It is important that we've talked about the language, people know where to go so they can improve their language. They can learn it. Why not? Even other people can come to the school and learn the language, correct?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So it's open for everybody. I never anticipated it to be an entirely Igbo project, Igbo, right? At this point, who knows who's who. But it's an entirely Igbo project. So about typically 30 to 40% of our students are non-Igbo people. And when I say non-Igbo people, I mean like what the casual person referred to as an Igbo person, which is, if it's diaspora, then like 1 or 2 generations removed. But I consider people who are descendants of slavery as no different from myself as far as being a person or whatever group that they identify with, right? Because what's my son gonna say? His grandfather came from Nigeria. son housey. You know what I mean? If they don't count, my son doesn't count. That doesn't make any sense, right? Um, that type of thing. So, but yeah, typically about 30 to 40% of the people have honestly never heard the Igbo language before.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Now, what would be your final thought here in the conversation that we had today? We have talked, of course, the beauty of our language, Igbo language in this case. Of course, we also dabble into a few things related to the language, of course, because like we already established here, in Africa, nothing exists in isolation. Everything is connected. So if we are talking of language, suddenly we are talking also of other things. No, that is very important. I don't want to go into the philosophy of that in my language too, because that is how it exists. It's general in Africa, no. So, what would be your conclusion to terminate the conversation?
Yeah. So again, my primary thing is I am a researcher. Um, I'm a student teacher, so I'm constantly learning about Igbo spirituality, cosmology, culture, everything, and bringing it forward on the medicine show. And I'll say this 100 times: my number one resource is language. When we're talking about the recording of history, things like that, what is very nice about our languages in Africa is that, and I'm going to ask you a question, I'm sure yours is going to be the same, is that if you want anything you want to learn, it's already encoded in the language, right? It's already there in the language. You don't need to, very little verification needs to be done, right? If I say Sharpie, Sharpie, I mean, it's what it is. That's how history is, culture, everything is done in our language. It's all right there. It's all just right there. So when somebody explains the topic and they say the words, like, oh yeah, duh, that's specifically saying, right? I'll ask you this. Have you noticed that oftentimes when people at home are trying to argue or explain culture, they will use the word as proof? Do you understand what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
say, like if they're trying to, I'm trying to think of an example. So if they say, I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, like Equinsu, for example. I'll use like Equinsu. Equinsu is used to translate as the devil by the church people. You understand? But we know that there's another meaning to Equinsu. And Equinsu literally says, Equinsu, what you will happen. What you will happen. This doesn't sound like the devil. This now means something else. But when people get into this argument, what does Equinsu mean? The person with sense will typically go, Gemunti. You understand? Listen to me. Equinsu, what you will happen. And then now all of a sudden, okay, maybe that doesn't devil, maybe it means something else. What does it mean? And we now talk about it. Oftentimes when we start discussing, the West will go, okay, cite your sources. You go get the paper and you'll go find the little thing according to David Milton, that kind of thing. The way we do it at home is we'll often take the word itself. You know what I'm saying? Like the word itself, because our languages are not buried by layers. English is buried by layers of colonialism, right? It's Germanic, and then there was a Norse period, so that buries things. And then there's, of course, the Greek and the Roman. And so when somebody says something like macrophage, if I don't know, I want to say Greek or Latin. I want. If I don't know that language, I have to now go to the dictionary. Macrophage is when a large cell begins eating or a smaller cell or whatever the hell it is, right? But the word macrophage literally means big eater in Latin, but it could be Greek. I'm not sure. It means big eater, right? Now in English, because there's these layers of colonialism, right? These layers of whatever. Had you just said that in English, you would need to explain to me it means big eater. But then that's how African languages are. We still have this advantage. This is why I think it's important to preserve our languages. We still have this advantage where the word means exactly what it's saying. I don't need to start learning this one and that one to figure things out. So that if we begin now teaching in our languages, if we begin using, because once we start doing science and technology, we switch to English. Once we start fixing a car, we switch to English, right? If we go to these English words themselves, especially the Latin and the Greek, These two languages, Latin and Greek, have this advantage where they're saying the thing straight, like straightforward. Construction. You have to explain to a 4-year-old what construction is, right? But if I just said what construction actually means in English, which is building a thing, it's a Latin sentence that says building a thing. That's all it is. So instead of saying construction, I can just say building a thing, and the little kid knows exactly what I'm saying. Well, our African languages still have that advantage. So they're optimal for teaching. They're optimal for understanding ourselves. They're optimal for understanding the world around us. Do you understand? And then for those in diaspora, you'll be very surprised at where the African language pops up in your own culture, be you Caribbean, North American, South American, or in Europe. A good example is we had a student, we were talking about the word like Igbo is big. And then, so if I say boof, something, boof, that means that it has grown to the point of uselessness. You understand? And then we had one student, she's a Jamaican origin, started laughing. And she's like, Jamaica, we say boof to like when somebody's like super fat, or like when somebody is just like a big, like, you understand, just like an insult. That's boof. You understand? People say, oh yeah, boof.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it. It really have been very valuable, just like the last time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
As always, anytime you want to talk, I'm here. And of course, continue the work you're doing. I like I said last time, I watch your videos pretty regularly. I need to catch up on some because you pump them out so fast. I'm falling far behind, but you've got some really interesting people and topics, and thank you for having this platform.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you also for what you're doing. We love it. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewafo. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you in the next episode.